And then also ensuring that our libraries and our public buildings could be true partners with public education entities, providing facilities for after-school programs. We always talk about that 3 to 6 p.m. being a critical time for a young person. Well, let's make sure that we're providing meaningful educational opportunities for young people within those public facilities. Keeps them out of trouble and keeps them moving in the right direction. And Houston's got 4 incredible economic sectors. You know, we are the oil and gas capital of the world. We have NASA. We have the epicenter of medicine called the Medical Center. And then we're shipping goods from all over the world to the Port of Houston. I want our educational system to be creating the next generation of CEOs, of doctors, astronauts, of energy leaders, right in our own backyard. You wouldn't have to travel to any other part of the country or the world to find your success, because it's all right here. If we just create a direct line from each one of those systems. I've done it. You know, when I took over the sheriff's office, I was understaffed. And I wanted to have a positive relationship with young people throughout the community. And so I created created a partnership with the Boy Scouts of America to create the Police Explorers Program. And that program, for most law enforcement agencies, has been what you call a check the box. It's a fluff program, where you get to shake hands with young people and have a little bit of fun, and it's just a public relations program. I wanted my program to be a true recruitment and hiring and succession program to the sheriff's office. And because I made a full commitment to it, guess what? An office that did not have a police explorers program, in short order became the largest program in the state of Texas. And only the second largest in America, only behind New York City. And we went from the first generation of explorers to young people who are now patrolling the streets of Harris County. Going and becoming detention officers and then becoming deputies. I think that's pretty cool. And it's the same way that our educational system should work with our respective economy. Ensuring that young people who are growing up here in Houston have the opportunity to be prepared for the workforce and the economic sectors that we have in our own community. But it also means that we have to work to identify those new economic sectors, building those new companies, attracting them to our city, either from across the country or internationally, or both, so that we'll never ever have to contend with another economic downturn like we've contended with. We're so fortunate. Houston's always had those 4 sectors that allows us to be the last in and the first out of every major economic downturn. We cannot take them for granted. But the green space, I'll go back to that because it's so critical. Every study tells us that when you invest in your green space, economic development in and of itself explodes in respective communities. Businesses want to be around it. Look at New York City. Look at other incredible cities in other parts of the world. Spain, China. But those parks, those green spaces are what I like to refer to as centers of community, where people are going not just to exercise, but to live. Reading a book, painting a picture, romancing, or just enjoying a leisure day. Centers of community. And that's what I see out in front. But also the fact that Houston is the most culturally rich and diverse city in America, where we speak 100 languages every single day. I want to set the vision that no matter your walk of life, no matter your culture, no matter your language, that when you arrive in Houston, you feel at home and you feel welcome, you feel embraced, and that you're now helping us sell the city to other parts of the country, not the world. That's what I see out in front of Houston. And I see also a city that doesn't have to contend with traffic congestion, because as we do in other parts of the world, we use bikes to get around town. Not as a matter of leisure, but as a matter of an alternative mode of transportation. And then you have a mass transit system that's connected all the economic sectors around the region, connecting Kingwood, and connecting Pearland, and Pasadena, and Missouri City, and Katy, and Sugar Land. You can get on the train and you can go pretty much everywhere you want to go. That's a big, I have a big appetite, that's a big vision. But unless you decide to take one foot, put it in front of the other, you don't start the journey to get to that vision. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Adrian Garcia, and I will be your mayor. Thank y'all very much.
Okay, we have some time for questions. Do we have any questions?
They're shy.
I've got one.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Mr. Garcia, I remember you used to come to Lonestar Baptist
Yes.
for the law enforcement
That's
every
right.
month,
Appreciate
every
you.
year.
Every year.
And we love you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Okay, so according to the Houston Chronicle, your predecessor as sheriff, Tommy Thomas, had a rape clearance rate of 42%. It said in the same article that yours got down to 18%. Why is that, and how have you responded to those numbers?
Well, I would, since I'm not the sheriff anymore, I can't respond to them directly, but I'll tell you what the reality of it is. I spent almost the great majority of my adult life looking into the face of victims of crime. You know, families of murder victims, families of rape, victims of rape, robbery, burglary, and working my tail off to solve every one of those crimes. So when politicians want to play with statistics, anybody can play with statistics. There's one statistic that you need to keep in mind. And the fact is that when I became a sheriff, nobody gave me a memo that I had an understaffed department to begin with. That's why there was $40 million in overtime. No one gave me the memo that we would step into the Great Recession and I would be forced into a hiring freeze that wouldn't allow me to hire new employees, much less replace people who were leaving. So I had an organization that dropped. In the same time, unincorporated Harris County was exploding with people. 400,000 people, new people, moved into Harris County. And so my strategy was to protect people in spite of all those challenges. In spite of the population exploding, in spite of a recession that kept me on a hiring freeze for 2.5 years, I was committed to protecting you. So when people cite rape, I look at my wife, I look at my daughter, and there's nobody in this race that's ever had to deal from day to day to day with victims of crime. So my commitment was always there to solve those cases. But I had to make tough decisions as an executive. And so my decision was to put deputies on the street to prevent future cases from hitting. And guess what? I lowered the crime rate in double digits. Not bad.
Sure. Yeah, surely we have some more questions.
I'm 14 years law enforcement in the division of the state, the county, and immigration. In the layoff that you were speaking about, how will you keep those people employed?
You know, that's a very good question. In fact, during this Great Recession, if you recall, deputy constables were laid off all across the county. And people were telling me to lay off deputies, my deputies. And I said, put it in writing, and I'll do it. Nobody put it in writing. Instead, I sharpened my pencil. I made tough decisions, once again. Promotions that were scheduled to happen, and I put them off so that we could save those dollars for salary dollars. I had employees coming to me saying, Sheriff, I'm due for my promotion. And I'm like, point out a colleague in the room that you want to lay off and I'll give you your promotion. That's how tough the things were. But I made those very, very critical, strategic decisions. And And it wasn't easy, but I balanced my budget. And so my goal is to find the inefficiencies in the bureaucracy. You know, there's a lot of people, that $40 million had changed some quality of life for a lot of people. So when I started ratcheting back, it wasn't easy either. Because folks had been accustomed to living off of overtime. And there was pain there too. But my commitment was to saving salary dollars and recognizing that it was cheaper to put people on straight time than on overtime. Do you know that the city of Houston right now is consuming $97 million of overtime? 97 million. Most of it's coming from 3 departments. So I think I know where I can find some money to save some jobs.
I'll ask a question. So I've lived in Texas about 8 years, and when I moved here, one of the things that struck me was we have sheriff, state police, city police, constables, innumerable law enforcement agencies. So as sheriff, what'd you do to try and work with these different law enforcement agencies, and how will that experience translate as you lead a city that's in a county and work with all these different agencies?
Well, you know, I've got the unique experience of actually coming from a city system, going to a county system, and then bringing that experience back. A couple of things. Number one is that the number of law enforcement agencies that we have in the region is close to 100. Close to 100. When you start to count the law enforcement agencies that are responsible for school districts, there's approximately 24 school districts in the Harris County area. You start to count the 33 cities in the Harris County area, almost every one have their own police department. Then you start with the state agencies, Metro, the various constables, the sheriff, the federal agencies, the railroad police. I mean, it mounts up very quickly. What I worked to do was, number one, trying to blur the lines, but rather try to be as cooperative with each other, sharing resources. We created task forces with the constable's office up in this area, the constable's offices and other sides of the county, creating that spirit of cooperation. As mayor, what I intend to do is to talk to other mayors and say, how can we leverage our respective law enforcement resources to better serve the community? Because at the end of the day, when you feel you've been a victim of crime, you don't want to struggle with, okay, what city am I in? What number am I supposed to call? And then, God forbid that you're on one side of the county and then you really live on the other side and you get home to realize that something's wrong, and then everybody's telling you, well, you got to go back to where this happened to file that report. We need to make it difficult for the bad guys to find creases to get into. So it won't be easy. In fact, I worked to create an analysis of the redundancy that is existent within all the respective budgets that goes into public safety. And there's a lot of area that I think that we can create partnerships. And I'm hopeful that the example that I've started with between the city and precisely the sheriff's office, when I was on council, we helped to pass a bond referendum for $30 million to construct a joint city-county jail processing center so that we could shut down the antiquated city jail system. The city passed this bond referendum, but in 2007, the county did not. And then I came in as a sheriff, and I reduced the cost of operations. And then on the ballot that the Astrodome was on, and the KD football stadium was on, remember those two referendums went up in flames. Mine squeaked by with a few votes. It was an ugly win, but it was a win. We are now constructing the first ever city-county joint processing center. City of Houston will be out of the jail business. There will be cost sharing involved in that operation. It is a very, very viable area of collaboration. I think another area that we can do that in is in the crime lab. I think another area that we can do that is in dispatching. I think another area that we can do that is with city libraries and merging Harris Health and the city public health department. So I think that there's other areas that we can do that collaboration on. I've done it, And I know the people on both sides of the equation, so I'm hopeful that I can bring people to the table.
Thank you. Other questions?
Don't be shy.
When you say green space, why not let Harris County take care of it? Because most of the city of Houston is in Harris County. And second of
All of the cities in Harris County.
yeah, I mean, most of Harris County is city of Houston.
There you go.
Okay, so why can't we also have some prisoners paint and mow and do things in the parks?
In fact, you do, thanks to me.
I've seen a few,
Yeah.
but not many.
Well, two things. Number one, it wasn't being done previously because we had a classification instrument that classified most of the prisoners as high risk. So you couldn't just take them out to the community. We revised that instrument, and miraculously we found that a lot of people were low to medium risk. And so we created the Earn Early Release program so that people can get out in the community, clean up trash, paint graffiti, mow down weeded lots, clean the bayou, clean parks, do a number of things, and then they could earn an extra day's time credit for time served. But that was only for people who were low to medium risk, no sex offenders or anything of that nature. And so we put that program in place. But you're right. I mean, it's just a matter of being creative, willing to take some chances, but creating a partnership. And that's what we were able to do. But to your initial question of how the city and the county can work together on parks, my mind's always open to new ideas. In fact, when I was a sheriff and there was a conversation about privatizing the jail, I was open to the analysis. As long as we could demonstrate to the taxpayer that it would save you money, I was open. They couldn't prove that. And so we didn't do it. But at the end of the day, it's about looking for all those opportunities that can create enhanced services, because you're paying a lot of money, and I think at the end of the day, you're expecting a great return on your investment.
Others are not. They're unincorporated. Like Summerwood, most Summerwood is not paying city of Houston taxes.
Correct.
So they're benefiting.
They're paying for with their taxes, they pay for fire and they pay for.
Not much, not
for
compared to
water.
me, not across the street.
But they do pay the
Don't pay
money.
city of Houston taxes.
But let me just say this. This is a good example of
They
the.
benefit from the fire department that's on the corner.
And there's some services that are paid into the city that the county then has to provide. I mean, the alarm permitting is an example in some areas. You pay your city alarm, but then I'm the one that answers it. All that to say is that we have to be willing to sit at the table to see how we can make your quality of life better, and that it makes sense on how your dollars are being invested. It's a challenge to bring two, systems of government together. But there's so many examples. I mean, you've seen other, and I'll tell you this, by the fact that we have some city and county library collaborations, the fact that we share the waterways, and the fact that we now have a joint processing center between the city and the county, I think we're inching closer to what could be a metro system of government. And it's something that we ought to be open-minded to and get people to sit down at the table, because it's probably going to be a more effective way to use your dollars to provide you the services you're looking for, and not let the geography dictate who pays what and who responds to what. Like I said, I think at the end of the day, you're looking for one number to call and you want service to be there promptly.
Do you think that we should reform the way that first-time offenders for drug crimes and drug addict arrests are handled in our judicial system?
Yeah.
Better yet, do you think that we should be leaning more towards offering more opportunities for rehab rather than incarceration?
Yes. I mean, I partnered with the district attorney on the First Chance program. And this is where first-time offenders who were caught with personal amounts of marijuana would not be charged, but rather they would be sent over to the city of Houston. Here's another collaboration. The city of Houston Sobering Center for a assessment to decide are you a true recreational user, or are you self-medicating a mental health condition, or do you have some other issues occurring? And so what we learned out of that was that, number one, for the true first-time offenders, it was working, that actually got referred to the program. But what we also learned is that number is really tiny. That number is really tiny. So I think that we have to be thoughtful about how do we expand this to people who may have some criminal history in their background, but not anything that we should be frightened about. Because what I did, and what I've always known about the county jail is that we have, when you look at one of the underlying health factors of people in the county jail, alcohol and substance abuse are high, the people in the jail are high consumers of that. And it could be an indicator of their propensity to criminal justice behavior. And so people who are mentally ill generally self-medicate strongly with alcohol and other chemicals. So I think it's imperative that we think, more broadly about this issue, be willing to sit to the table and have some very candid conversations about what is the best way to treat people, because a lot of them are principally sick, they're not bad people, and so I'm open to that, and that's why I pushed for that first-time program, and I'm proud of the fact that the district attorney was willing to sit down and work, and we learned a lot from it.
I can add one more to that if you want. It's drug related. Okay, so I remember, this might have been in the last year or two, HPD had an officer that was helping traffic drugs through the city. How would you as mayor help weed out the corruption in the Houston Police Department?
That's a good question, because think about this phenomenon. Many of us remember the challenges that we had with law enforcement back in the 50s and 60s. And but back then, there wasn't a whole lot of requirements to become a police officer. And yet today, we have the most educated law enforcement workforce in the country. Now, let me preface this by saying that the example you cited is a rarity. It's a tiny fraction. So I don't want to cast a shadow on law enforcement by any stretch of imagination, but the things that have happened in other parts of the country, like Ferguson and Baltimore, have really created a whole conversation as to why is this happening. And I think one thing that we have to remember is that we have much more technology today than we've ever had before, and so we're capturing more than we're probably capturing what was already there. Not necessarily having more of it. We probably won't know that for many more years to come. But I think it's imperative that every law enforcement agency commits itself to transparency and accountability. I mean, when people would send me emails of things that they saw or postings on Facebook, everything went straight to internal affairs. No stop, just go straight to internal affairs, let's investigate it. Sometimes you want to say, oh, that's not a big deal. You know what? We can't take that attitude. We have to commit to you, to everybody in this room, that we're going to work hard to maintain the public's trust. So I think that the other thing that we have to do more often is be willing to sit down with the public on a regular basis. The police department just proposed its body cam policy. And it got some pushback. And why did it get the pushback? It wasn't because of the technology. Nobody's arguing that you're using the right technology for the approach. What was what the pushback was that community leaders, community organizations, advocacy groups were saying, we don't trust your policy. You know, who's going to hold the evidence, and do they have the ability to manipulate the video? And then if we say, well, okay, we won't hold the data, we'll send it over to a district attorney's office. Well, there's just as much distrust there. And so we have to be willing to sit down at a table so that there is confidence that we're taking the right approach, with the right attitude, with the right intent, and that we're not, you know, we're not trying to hoodwink anybody. But that takes a lot of time, and that takes a lot of energy. But it's what we have to commit ourselves today, because there's a lot of distrust, and we have to put that to rest. Yes, sir.
You talked about creating roads more pedestrian friendly. And I'm curious about what you would do as mayor specifically to make cycling safer in downtown Houston.
Oh, I love it.
Because I know it's very difficult traversing the roads there. Experience myself. So yeah, how would you?
You know, there's a lot of great Houstonians that are part of an organization called Bike Houston. And they have proposed two fundamental initiatives that I support. One is called Complete Streets, which means that we have, if you've been downtown and if you've been on Lamar, you see a small lane that's green. That is our first dedicated bike lane. I've tried to ride my bike around my neighborhood on that 3-foot lane. I can't stay in it because there's potholes in the bike lane. But this Complete Streets concept is something that I support. I'm proud of the mayor for putting this in place, and I commit to making sure that it's furthered along with the reconstruction and improvements of streets as we go along. It'll be hard to say we'll do this tomorrow. I commit to building all these dedicated bike lanes tomorrow because of the lack of resources and financial resources that we have. But anytime you work to improve a new street, anytime you reconstruct a street, we're putting in new curbs, we're putting in new sidewalks. Why not take the opportunity to put in a new dedicated bike lane? And so that is strategy number one. The second thing that Bike Houston has proposed, which I totally support, is something called Vision Zero. You know that we lead, I'm trying to remember if it's the state or the country, in the number of bicycle and pedestrian fatalities. So your circumstance, thankfully you're here to tell us about it. But if you ever drive around the city, you see these white bikes on the side of the road, they're referred to as ghost bikes. They're the equivalent of a cross that people put up where someone has died in a car accident. So my commitment to moving Houston forward and creating a safer environment for bicyclists is also there. Right now, the strategy is to, the city council passed what is called the 3-foot ordinance, meaning that if a car gets in within 3 foot of the bicyclist, then they would be written a citation. Well, that's a great concept. The problem is it's hard to, for a police officer to be able to argue with a defense attorney, well, was it 3 feet or was it 2.5? How do you know it was 3 feet? Do you have, RoboCop eyes, and can you measure distances? And, so it's tough to write the citation. So I think there's only been a handful of citations issued since that ordinance was passed. But here's my attitude. It's cars and the drivers of those cars, and some bicyclists too. Okay, bicyclists are not out of this, because sometimes I'm driving around and you see a bicyclist just run a red light, run a stop sign, and they forget that they're obligated to the same traffic rules that motor vehicle operators are. But my strategy is that any person who gets a ticket for a moving violation, because you've already demonstrated your risk, your propensity to create risk on the roadways, but every moving violator should go through the bicycle safety course, making them aware that there's bicyclists in town, so we can hit center mass, if you will, to work to change the attitude of car operators and remind them that we have people who are using their bicycles as modes of transportation, and we've got to respect that and have a safety-minded attitude about them. So that's those two things, I think, dedicated bike lanes is imperative, and not these little 3-foot, lanes on the sides of the curbs, but really dedicated bike lanes so that vehicle operators know to stay away from them. And then, supporting Vision Zero.
Mr. Garcia, will you take strict measures about DWI, especially when the people are kids? Because we are tired that heard in the news, I'm sorry, I was drunk, and they kill people.
Yeah. I had to visit, talking about, having to see the face of victims. As a sheriff, I visited the mother of a deputy who was killed by a drunk driver as he was coming home from an off-duty job. And then I had to visit with the mother of Deputy Valdez, who was killed by another impaired driver. She was impaired on chemicals. And there's some people, a little bit to this conversation, the challenge with addressing these public safety issues in a comprehensive way, is that some people have tried to get me to say, well, Sheriff, DWIs, they're not that bad. It's only their first time. The people who killed the deputy on his way home, the person who killed the deputy when he was working, never been arrested for DWI. And so here in Harris County, had been leading the nation in alcohol-related fatalities for many years. I don't think we're more prone to drinking than any other place. But I think our sprawl is one of our greatest challenges. Because, some people, like in Washington, they ride their subway system and their light rail system all over the place, and they're not in a car. So they might stop somewhere and get drunk, but they're not stepping into a car. They're on a bus, they're on a subway system, they're on the light rail system. And so our sprawl, I think, creates this challenge of people not intending to do anything horrible, but because they're dependent on a car to get around town, it creates that terrible mix of distance and consumption. And so one of the things that, look, I support taxi cab drivers, but some have said to me, we want you to do away with Uber. No. The more options we have for people not to drive, the better. So you can enjoy a drink or two. But I think our sprawl is one of our greatest challenges, but we will continue to work very aggressively to communicate to people to be responsible and to use alternative modes of transportation or just not to drink it. Thank you.
Where do you stand with homelessness in the Houston area?
I want to resolve it. I want to help. That there's people who are chronically homeless. They're not bad people, but they live paycheck to paycheck. And any time that one paycheck is disrupted, they're out on the street. And then there are people who are mentally ill and are out on the streets. When I was a city council member, people threatened to unelect me because I supported what is referred to as single residency occupancy units, which is a transitional living facility for people who have been chronically homeless, to have a place to kind of reestablish themselves with guidelines and discipline and structure, relearn to pay the bills and things of that nature, and then allow them to move into another living facility. I supported those. People don't like those because they're like, great that you help the homeless, but what's that term? Not in my backyard. And so, in fact, when I was a sheriff, you know that you're paying $700,000 a year for water, electricity, and air conditioning in the old county jail that is no longer used as county jail. It has some of the operations, it's got the dispatch center, and it's got some record keeping and some storage. But the other floors are empty, but water, electricity, and air conditioning is going to that place all day long. I wanted to use it as a transitional living facility for the homeless people who are leaving the county jail. Because when we release them, if there's no intervention, they end up right back in the circumstances that got them to the jail to begin with. And unfortunately, I couldn't create the right synergy to do something innovative. People were telling me, well, if you're going to have people live there, then the place has to be made, has to be retrofitted, has to meet all the codes and all the standards. And I was like, man, I just want to use one floor to test it and see if it works, and then we can decide what kind of investment it would be worth. But I'm committed to addressing the homeless, especially when, typically when you think about homelessness, I'll just speak for myself. Growing up, I'm a Vietnam era baby. I remember that whole conversation, and I remember how difficult it was for some folks to come back home, and then the whole experience and how they were treated. We saw a lot of Vietnam veterans end up on the streets almost immediately. Well, we're now starting to see Iraqi veterans on the streets, our most recent veterans on the streets. And that's unconscionable. And so I worked with the VA to try to create housing vouchers for the veterans that were in the county jail. We created an independent unit called Stars and Stripes so that veterans could reintegrate and create a community support group amongst themselves, so that when they left, they would have those individuals kind of helping each other out to move along, very effective. But it's a big issue. And one thing I'll tell you that was an eye-opener for me becoming your sheriff, coming from the city where most of the things I dealt with were principally within the 610 loop, was to see just how much homelessness we have throughout the unincorporated area of the county. No one is free of this problem. And so we must work collectively to continue.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank y'all very much. Good question.